Okay, so talking about custom hooks today. Um, a few notes here. We'll do a little bit of custom hook theory because, as I mentioned, there's not a lot to custom hooks. They're pretty simple. In fact, all the instructors, we do draw straws, or we play rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock to see who can teach the custom hooks lecture, because it really is just so much fun. And I mean, the technical description of a custom hook is it lets you remove or move repetitive or complex code out of your component. You can think of it as just a helper function, which it actually is. A custom hook is just a helper function for React. A key point is we pull logic out, not visuals. So we have a component that does something, we can pull out all the logic, maybe the stuff that interacts with the state, pull that out into a separate file, call it a thing called a custom hook, and we're good to go. That makes our component look a lot simpler. So that way our component just deals with the visuals, which is what components are good at. Components are good at rendering, showing us stuff on the screen. And we can take all that busy logic out of the component itself and put it in the custom hook. So they are indeed helper functions, but they're not just any helper functions. They're helper functions that do React stuff. Generally, they use hooks such as use state, use effect, and other React hooks. But they really are just helper functions. But normal helper functions, such as your selectors, get appointments for a day, they can't use React stuff. So they can't do any state, or they can't do a use effect or any other React hook. That's because they are not custom hooks. Only custom hooks can do that. So you ask the obvious question, well, what makes a custom hook? Well, it's a very, very complex procedure. You have to take your file and your function, and you have to make it start with the word use. Once you put the word use in front of it, it is now a custom hook, and React can treat it like a custom hook rather than just a regular function. So React hooks start with the prefix use. You must say use. So use and then whatever you want. Of course, all the other hooks, use state, use effect, and other ones we'll use later on, no pun intended, all start with the word use. So to make a custom hook, you just write any function, anything you want, and stick the word use in front of it, and voila, you have a custom hook. And yeah, it's just as simple as that. Now, we can do fun things with them. We'll go through some of that, but really just take a function like a helper function, stick the word use in front of it, and you got yourself a custom hook. The custom hooks are helper functions, so they're outside of the component, maybe in their own file, like the helpers. They're in a separate file, so multiple components can use them, because any function outside of a component, if you export it, is available to any other component to be used. So yeah, these are just helper functions that start with use. So important to remember that if you use a custom hook and you have some state inside it, multiple components that use the same custom hook don't get to share that state. They each get their own. So a multiple instance of the same custom hook, they don't share state, which was kind of a downer. It's like, this looks so cool. I was going to use it. And it's like, wait a second, this is a different state. I can't share it. So no, it's not shared state. It's not a way to cheat and get shared state. You still have to use props to pass state down. However, in a little later on, I'll be teaching a way to get around that limitation of state, showing you a really cool way that you can share state in React without passing props, but that's for later. And a custom hook can return anything you want. Why is that? Because it's a function. It's just a function. In fact, in React, everything's just a function, and it returns stuff. Functions have this really useful return statement, and we can return things from functions. So a custom hook is no exception. We can return anything you want, a value, an array, an object, return a function, anything you want, just like any other function. It's sometimes easy to get bogged down in React and forget that, wait a second, this is just a JavaScript function. It starts at the top and it runs all the way to the bottom and it returns something. That's how it works. So try not to forget that when you're doing React, that a React component is just a function. It is a function that returns JSX because that is the definition of a component. In other words, a React component is a JavaScript function that returns JSX, but it's still, first and foremost, a JavaScript function. All right. So that's enough of the fun theory. This is about all I can say about custom hooks. Like I couldn't think of anything else to say. So like I had to double space to fill the page to make it look like a lot. It's not. Custom hooks are just fun to use. So for the next hour and a bit, we got to just do some fun stuff with custom hooks. You'll be doing 2 custom hooks in your scheduler app. The first one is a bit of a JavaScript puzzle. The second custom hook, dirt simple. All right, let's make ourselves a custom hook. So to do that, we're going to make ourselves an application. I've got a little application here called Hello React. This is the world's smallest React app. It has really 2 files, app.js, index.js, which as we know has almost nothing in it. There's my index.js, which is nothing, and an app.js. As we know, the minimum required to have a React component is an index HTML that doesn't do much, just has some div with a named container in it. So you have to have an index HTML, you have to have an index.js, and you probably should have an app.js. Although strictly speaking, you can get away with just 2 files in a React app, index HTML and index.js, just like jQuery. So you don't need much. But in order for Webpack to allow its development environment to work and allow things to do magic refreshing, such as if I change this to, Hello React World and save it. In order for that magic to happen, you have to have a separate file or a file separate from your index.js. So we do that all the time. We don't normally stick everything in index.js because that'd be kind of unwieldy. So app.js, so super simple React app. As is customary among all instructors, we will use the ubiquitous counter as our example for doing a React app, because counters are like, well, they're like your best friend. Like you can't go wrong with a counter. You can count on counters. Any more bad puns people can think of about counters? Okay. They're counter worthy. No, it doesn't make any sense. Okay. They're count worthy. Yes. Okay. So let's make ourselves a counter. So we know that in a React app, this is just a function. So whenever this application renders, the whole function runs from beginning to end. That's what it does. If a render happens, it runs again. It just runs again and again and again, over and over again, every time any kind of state changes in our application. Because we know that a change of state is what triggers a render. And what is a render? A render is run the function again. That's a render. It's like a fancy term for run the function, but they like the word render better. So, okay. You also may notice, I think Andy has mentioned this, that we've got this kind of old school declaration, function app, rather than going const app equals function or an arrow function. Doesn't matter. The reason they did that is kind of interesting, because I always wondered, why did they use that like old school, JavaScript way of declaring a function, like function app? We were told like all weeks and weeks, don't use that method. Well, they do it for one really kind of silly reason, because we can do this. We can take that and do that there. We can save ourselves a line. We couldn't do that if we had it as a variable. We'd have to then export the variable. So, and export default. There we go. Okay, same thing. It's one extra line. Fun fact, we don't even need to have the function name in there. We can literally just do this and have it as an anonymous function. But that can mess up your dev tools, and you won't be able to see the name of the function. It'll just have a bunch of unnamed functions or components in your app. So I wouldn't recommend it. Give your functions names, even though you're exporting them directly. So, all right, enough of that. let's make ourselves an app with a counter. So as we know, because a React app is a function, any variable in the function, if I have let counter 0, any variable in the function will get reinitialized. The question is, export to export default. Correct. Export can export like one thing, export default. Exports can export many, or you can have both. You can have a default and other exports in the same file. The difference is the default one gets like just the name. Remember, you've seen import React and then curly brace, use effect, use state. React is the default export. The other, I guess, the leading or support cast is in the curly braces. So the main actor, React, gets the top billing, no curly braces, but all the other exports, they get the kind of, also starring use state and use effect. Okay, all right. So as we know in a function, if I say let counter equals 0, and if I do something later on that does counter plus plus, later on, maybe inside a function, if that causes a re-render, this whole function runs again and counter gets reset back to 0 again. So my counter will not survive a re-render. So that was a problem with functional components because, as we know, React used to be all class-based components, which, by the way, we'll be doing next week, just one day. A problem with functional components is variables wouldn't survive. They would just get rewritten because they run every time, again and again. So counter gets reset to 0. So we came up with state, as we know, and the purpose of state is to allow variables to survive a re-render. That is their reason for existing. So I can do the pattern we've seen many times, const counter and set counter. By now we're used to this. Set counter. Can use class components with functional components? Yes, you can. You can indeed use class components. In fact, a lot of the existing libraries that you use are in fact class components. On the outside, they look just like components. You can go pointy bracket, any component, attribute, attribute, attribute. It'll work just fine. It's where you get an app component that's been written for you and it's class-based. And that's what happens to people. They download this, what looks like a really great template. Wow, look at this thing. I can download it and my final project's like almost done for me. Yeah, and it's first off, it's probably crap. And secondly, it's very likely class-based component. And thirdly, it's probably crap. So I strongly recommend against that. Okay. So counter use counter, and we use the use state. And let's see, use state. And I love it because VS Code will automatically pop in that import for me. Use state, and we'll start with a 0. So now we have a counter. Okay. Great. So I have a counter and I can use my counter. Let's put my counter somewhere. Let's put it in inside another div. Make another div. I'm going to display. Once again, as we've learned this week, that there are two parts to a React component. We have, really, it's like before and after return. So the return is kind of like the BC AD thing in history. Before return and after return. So this is BR and this is AR. So this is 4 lines AR or 3 lines before R, before return. It's a big deal because the return is the render. This is like the showtime. If you think of a React component like a play or a movie, and this is all the preparation for that event or that show. Building all the sets, training all your actors, getting things ready, and then the return, that's like showtime when the curtain lifts and there's your play and it's all been done. This is why I tell people, don't go doing a lot of stuff inside your return. You should not see any dot maps inside your return. Those should be done way beforehand. You wouldn't produce a Broadway play and when the curtain lifts, you got some stagehands still banging up some sets. Like, sorry guys, keep going. Watch the play instead. Don't look at me. No, of course, you would have all that done before the show starts. So same thing. get all your work done before the show starts. So we're going to get our stuff done. We're going to build some functions to do stuff for us. So let's go ahead and render our count. This is the visual part now in the return. This is the visual part of my component. Okay. And counter, there we go. Okay. And I have a, count not defined, go on. If you ever get those weird red stuff or errors that you don't understand in React, just refresh your browser. That just means Webpack got a bit confused. That's all. So I think to absolutely no surprise to anybody, I get a 0 on the screen. There's my counter. Okay. Wow, that's an amazing app. I have one state discerning on the screen. Yeah, totally unexciting. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and build this counter as a regular component. So what can we do with counters? Well, they're very versatile. There's kind of really 2 or 3 things we can do with them. We can make them go up, we can make them go down, and we can set them back to 0 again. That's kind of the entire lifespan of a counter. So 3 things. So I'm going to write 3 functions that will allow me to do this. So let's make a function. We'll call one increment. And we'll call another one decrement. Let's go ahead. This one's going to go, there we go. Wow. Counter +1. There's my increment. My decrement is surprisingly similar to increment, except it's spelled with a DE and it makes it go down. There we go. And I have a clear, so which is kind of similar. Call it clear. There we go. Clear, and it's going to set counter to 0. I know, amazing feat of software engineering to build 3 functions that affect a counter. So, okay, so I have 3 functions, up, down, and clear. So I can use those functions. Probably need something to call them. So I can make really anything I can click on, inputs, LIs, but the cheapest thing to go or to use is a button. So I'll just make a button. So there we go. Got one button. I'll make that my increment. So on click equals my increment function. There we go. There we go. Look at that. I have a counter. Okay. All right. So I've got a button there. Let's put my button, actually put my button inside my div, and I'll put my other 2 buttons, 2 and 3. I'll make one plus, I'll make one minus, and I'll make one for 0. There. So this is decrement, decrement, and clear. Okay. So far, plus, 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 minus, 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 and 0. Look at that. Wow. Software engineering feat of genius, I think. Okay. All right. So not that exciting. It's a counter, but it does demonstrate all the principles of React app. We have some JSX that has clicks that we can do stuff with. We have some functions. We have some state with functions that act on that state. And that's really the logic. So this component really has 2 parts to it. It has some state and some logic around that state. And then it has the visual component. It has the return, the showtime, which is our JSX, which is rendered on the screen. So this is great. But what happens if I want to have another counter on the page? Well, I can make another counter. I can make another state. I can call it, well, counter 1, because that name's used, set counter 1. And I can put another counter here. Do the same thing. Like that. But of course, the button still uses my original function. So I would have to write more functions to act on this new state. So that's a bit of a problem for me. So I don't want to do that. So that seems like an awful lot of work. So I have this logic that I would like to reuse. Notice it's logic. In this case, it's state logic. I would like to reuse the state logic someplace else, like someplace else in the same component. So this is a great candidate for a custom hook, which is just a helper function. I'm going to take really that logic, which is the state and its associated functions, so the state and its functions, and put it in some place where it can be reused, either by this component or another component. And then I've got a reusable custom hook. Let's go ahead and do that. So we normally put custom hooks in a folder called hooks, unsurprisingly. And new file, we'll call it usecounter.js. Great. Okay. So we're going to take our logic and we're going to put it into a function. We're going to call the function useCounter. So we'll make a function. We can either do export default function or regular function. We'll do it the way we've been taught, which is using a functional expression, and we'll call it useCounter equals function. And we'll make sure we export that. Export default. Export default, use counter. Great. Okay. So now we have a helper function. It looks like a custom hook because it starts with the word use. So this is in fact a custom hook, but it doesn't do anything yet. So let's make ourselves a very, very simple custom hook first. We'll have a custom hook that just has some state in it. There. And I'm going to say use state. There we go. Makes my life easy. And it does an auto import in VS Code. Okay. There. Okay. So now this is indeed a custom hook because it is a helper function, starts with the word use, and does some React stuff. What's the React stuff? The React stuff is it's using useState. So that's useState is a React hook. This is indeed a custom hook. It doesn't return anything. There's no requirement for a custom hook to return anything, but it's kind of useless if it doesn't. It's just state. That's it. I mean, I can say use state, but there's not much I can do with this this use counter yet. So I probably can return my counter. There. Okay. Now I have a custom hook that returns something, returns counter. And we can use this custom hook. This is an incredibly simple custom hook. It just has some state. So let's use my use counter. Const counter, call it counter1 because counter is used, equals use, and now let's see if it will do will it import? Oh, it might. Oh, it does. I love that auto import part. Okay, use counter. There. Okay, seemed to work. No errors. So now I'm calling a custom hook and I get a constant called use counter that will survive a render because it's stored in state. So let's just put my counter one here just for fun. Let's put my counter one after the buttons to make it kind of clear where that one's coming from. There. And it's 0. Okay, so the world's simplest and incidentally most useless custom hook doesn't do anything. It simply wraps a use state, and that's all it's doing. So it's very useless because it gives me the state, but it gives me no way to change it. So my use counter gives me back a 0, and that's all I get. Okay, so I suppose I could modify my use counter. Let's give it a parameter. We'll start with 0. We'll start with a parameter where the counter starts. So we can say start that counter at 5, and inside use counter we can say, call it start, I'll put start here. Sure. So a little more functionality. So status bar. Wow, start. There we go. A little more functionality, but still not so useful. Now it just starts at 5. So what I do not have yet is I have no way for the outside world to do anything to that state. So I need to have my custom hook provide more information or more things back to the user. It's just counter. You get back an integer is all you get back. Why? Because the function returns an integer, returns in this case 5. I need to have this function return that 5 or that number, and maybe return more stuff. Maybe return some functions that will allow people to do stuff to that counter. So now JavaScript functions, because once again, don't forget, this is a function. This is a JavaScript function. Starts there, ends there, has a return. They can only return one thing, can't they? And I've returned one thing. So let's take a vote from the studio audience. How can I return more than one thing from a JavaScript function? Any suggestions? Because I need some suggestions. How can I return more than one thing from a JavaScript function? There must be a way. I have one vote. Object, returning an object. Anybody else? Return XY. Ask nicely. Yes, I like that one. Would you please return 2 things? Like, please, just this once? And JavaScript says, no, I only return one thing. Sorry. Okay. I could return a function. Yes. So let's make a function. In fact, let's take our increment, because that's a great candidate. So I have this function. So I've got a function called increment. I want to get that function out of this function, this increment. What do I do? So I can return my increment, sure. But now anybody using my custom hook has no way to know what the counter is anymore. If I returned, if now, because now function, this is now increment 1 is a function. So I've got increment 1, but I could call it increment 1, but I won't know what that counter is, because that's somebody else's counter. So counter is now buried inside this custom hook counter. No one has access to it. I can't even render it, because when I call this custom hook, all I get back now is use counter returns my function. So I need to return more than one thing. So we had a couple of suggestions. We had an object. Is there anything else I can use that would allow me to return more than one thing? Object is a great choice, by the way, and we use that a lot. So yes, Jennifer, thank you. An array is also one of those things that holds more than one thing. So in JavaScript, there are several structures that contain more than one thing. At the most basic level, there are arrays and objects. There are also things like sets and other stuff, which we won't be doing today, which are other collections. The generic term is collection. It is a collection of things, an array or an object or a set or any of the other collections that are available to you. So we have an array. So in this case, I have a choice to make. I can either have my custom hook return an array or an object. And this is a design choice. Like, oh, what do I do here? And honestly, I'll just pick one. It doesn't matter. I can always change it later if I realize, oh, I probably should have returned it as an object, not as an array. So I'm going to choose array this time, and we'll take a look and see if that was a good choice. So how do I return an array? Well, I just return an array. I put square brackets around it, and now I can return the counter, and I can return the function increment. That's it. So that was easy. That's it. So of course, being an array, I can return as many things as I want now, which makes my life easy. So now my use counter no longer returns just one thing. It returns an array of things. So I can dereference that like this. There. that. Now I can say counter 1 and increment 1. Of course, as we know, I could have done this as well. Const, counter hook, hook with two O's equals use counter. I could have done this, of course. There. And then I could have said, counter 1 equals counter hook 2, or counter hook 0 rather, counter hook 0, and increment 1 equals counter hook 1. I could have done this. We've seen this already from use state. This is just the shorthand way of doing it. Now, you may have said to yourself, wait a second, this looks an awful lot like the use state, doesn't it? Like it's exactly the same syntax, isn't it? Yeah, it is. So that kind of gives us some insight into what use state is doing. It looks like a use state is just a function that's returning an array. Well, you'd be completely right. That's exactly what it is. So because my custom hook is a function that's returning an array. So we wouldn't normally see it this way, but just so you know, we could do it this way. But you would normally see it with the array destructuring done like this instead. So now my use counter returns two things. Well, that's great because now I can actually use, let's make another div there with another counter. But now this is counter 1, and we'll call increment 1 instead. Okay, so there's our original counter. There's our counter 1, started with 5. So hopefully, with no other work required, I should be able to click plus, and yes, it does. It makes my new counter go up. Of course, my minus is still hooked up to my original counter. That doesn't work, but this one works. I'm on my way to having some reusable functionality in a custom hook. Let's go back to our use counter because that was exciting. Let's go ahead and move some more stuff into there. Let's move the rest of our functions in there. There, let's take those, I'll put those in there as well. Oops. There, we have 3 things. And let's return those things. Let's return decrement, and clear. Okay, now our function is returning 4 things. Doesn't matter, it's still an array. So you can return as many things as you want from your function or from your custom hook. Doesn't matter. Okay, so now my custom hook, since it does return 4 things, I can assign that to 4 things. I can call it increment 1, decrement 1, and clear 1 there. And now, no one's shocked I'm doing that. No, okay. All right, so now let's see if this works. Plus, 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 minus, oh, look at that. So now it looks like I don't need any of this other logic. So I can remove all this stuff. And of course, that one's not used anymore. So we'll take this out there. All right, so now I have a custom hook that is abstracted the logic out of my component. So that's all now wrapped up, encapsulated. That's a good word, encapsulated inside this custom hook use counter. I just simply grab them and I can now plus, look at that. I love counters. They're mesmerizing, aren't they? So, okay. So we have indeed abstracted this away. So we don't use state anymore here, do we? But, so it does make our component much simpler. We have a nice, simple component. Now the component is really only dealing with the visuals. It doesn't have to concern itself with those messy logic stuff. That's all taken care of by the hook now. Now I can concentrate as a component designer on just how my page looks and just have a custom hook right there to grab that. Okay, so that's the fundamental of how an actual custom hook works. As you can see, there's not a lot to it. I just took those lines, literally word for word, right out of my app, move them into a function called useCounter, and exported it, and I was good to go. And by the way, you'll be doing that, I think later on this week, maybe tomorrow or Monday, you'll be moving some stuff out of your app.js and putting it in a custom hook, and you literally just copy and paste, like boom, copy it in, out, put use in front, and it works. And the most common comment I get on that exercise is, holy crap, that worked. I can't believe it, because it looked so hard. It wasn't. So it was a copy and paste exercise. Okay, that's custom hook number 2. So we have a custom hooks. This, I mean, useCounter is not most exciting, but it does demonstrate all the features of how a custom hook would work. Let's make ourselves another, maybe slightly more interesting custom hook. So let's say that I wanted to make an Axios call to some API. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to put my counter. I'll leave my counter here because you can't get enough counters. I'll rename this to the counter. We've all seen this safe rename by now, haven't we? Right click, rename symbol, like this, where it will safely and in scope rename your variables. That should be the only way you are renaming any variable in your code from now on, presumably. Hopefully not the really unsafe search and replace, because that would be really bad. There. Search and replace A and replace it with E would, of course, make a big mess of your file. Okay. Okay, let's do some Axios stuff. We are going to have some state. Let's make some state. Axios, we're going to get a body back. So we'll call it body. That's our data that we really get back from our Axios. That data equals use state. As you know, anything that might change, we have to put in use state. And we'll start off with an empty body. All right. So I'm going to put my results from my Axios call in this body. I could have called it data, but I'm going to call it body for now. Okay. And I want to do an Axios call to retrieve something from some API. And I want this to happen when my component renders. So we can use effect. Use effect. Use our auto import. Love that. Look at that. Okay. Use effect is a function. There. Use function takes 2 parameters. The first is a function itself, and the second is optional, but generally is included. And this is when I want this thing to happen. So that's kind of the easy way to understand what useEffect does. It takes 2 parameters. What do you want to do? And when do you want it to happen? That's useEffect. So what I want to do, I want to run that function. That's the what. And the when is when one of those things changes, or in the case of an empty array, just on first render. So use effect, what and when. Okay. So my when is on render, so I'm happy with that. And my what is going to be a function. Okay. So we want to do something. Now, as we know, we've used Axios before. I think when you did the fetch days, and we famously used it to retrieve our great quotes back in promises. So we'll do something very similar today. So I have to import Axios. Do I have Axios? Let's take a look. Import Axios. It may or may not be installed. I may have to install it here. Axios from Axios. Let's see if it compiles or not. Let's take a look. Oh, it must be installed. Okay. I'm going to call Axios. So we know how to do that. We go axios.get. There. Axios.get. And of course, axios.get requires a parameter. It needs a URL. So go HTTPS:// Why don't we go with the same one? API dot Kanye dot rest, like that. Great. Okay. And let's look at our dev tools, and seems okay. There we go. That's from typing, but I think we're good. Let's refresh our page. So far, so good. Okay. No errors. Okay, so of course, axe.get returns a promise. And we all know I love promises. So on our promise, we're going to do a dot then to start with. Dot then. And in a dot then, we need to have a function. So we'll call our usual dot then, call it res. I just love the word res. And inside our res, let's do the following thing. Probably just going to set body. And we'll set body to res.data. And why res.data? Well, because, oh, set data, that should be set body. There we go. Okay. When our axe.get succeeded, we just set the body. This is a very common pattern you're going to see in React, certainly using Axios. Get your thing and then just save it. It's so different from jQuery, where our natural inclination is to, okay, get something and then, okay, let's do a bunch of DOM stuff and like let's do this stuff. No, we just get it and save it. That's it. Just get your stuff and save it. Let the other logic take care of what to do with body. So it does take a bit of getting used to. Let's go ahead and do something with our body. Now we have this body. Let's go ahead and render this body. As I'm thinking we got something back. Let's give it a try and see if in fact I really did get something back. So let's just put here. We'll go make another div just to make sure things are separated out. There we go. I'm going to make a UL. I'm just going to put it in a list. There. There. I'll make an LI. Okay. LI, and we'll show the body. We'll actually put our body inside this. And since we have body, we should be able to put body just like this. But of course, if I do that, what am I going to get? I'm going to get the word body. Okay. Rule number one, which you should know by now, curly braces to surround anything that is JavaScript. There. This particular body has a quote in it, doesn't it? I remember that now. There. Okay. So we will be recognized. What an apt initial quote for our first React custom hook. Great. So looks like this worked. So whenever this page renders, you get another use effect running on render. It doesn't run again though. When I press plus and minus, look at that. This whole function's rendering. And like, let's actually prove that. Let's do a console log. Let's prove to ourselves that this function is running again. App component is rendering. Now, there, okay. All right. So let's take a look. We're going to look at our dev tools. So it ran once. So when I first loaded the app, the console log said app component is rendering now. Let's go ahead and hit plus. Look at that. Hard to see, but that counter is in fact moving. Every time I hit a number, the function's running again because I'm console logging that. But I am not changing my quote because this is only running the first time because it runs only on first render. Okay. All right. So far, this is just pretty vanilla use effect with Axios. Pretty simple. But there is some logic involved. I've got a bunch of kind of messy logic happening here. So this stuff there is, although it's not bad, it's still logic, and it does distract from my visuals. What my component I'm really concerned about is how does it look? How does this actual look? I like this. It's nice. In fact, we can even add some more cool logic. Let's go and add a switch to this to turn it on and off. Let's try this. We have this counter. So why don't we go ahead and use our counter? We're going to put one of those conditional rendering things. Remember the term conditional rendering? We've all done this in our appointment. Conditional rendering is something you're going to see an awful lot in React. To do that, you take whatever you want and you got to put curly braces around it. So I want to conditionally render this thing. There. Now, so far, nothing happens. It's perfectly valid. You can put curly braces around whatever you want in React. Okay. But I'm going to now conditionally render this. I'm going to say counter %2 there and there. Okay. So now, hopefully, look at that. All I've said is if my counter is odd, that's all. So every second time I click on something, it's going to just show something. That's all. Okay. But you notice I'm also showing a 0 because that is not a Boolean expression. So one thing to really be careful with when you're doing conditional rendering, don't take shortcuts because counter %2 is 0 when it's even, and it's 1 when it's not. So what can happen is you can end up with these weird, unexpected results. Like, what is that 0 doing there? It's because I could go not equals 0. Now it is a Boolean expression, and Boolean expressions do not render. So yeah, so it's checking out odd or even, right? There, not equals equals there. There we go. You notice React noticed that? It says, wait a second. That's cool. I should have used not equal equal. So yeah, so thank you, React, for that astute noticing that. All right. So yes, so when you do your conditional rendering, it's got to be a Boolean. Although, of course, we're used to doing this in JavaScript. We almost always do this. In a regular JavaScript, we just go, yeah, if that, that's fine. If counter %2 do something, great. But we're rendering here. This stuff is going to render that or render that. This means render this and render that. So what happens is it renders both, right? But since this one is false, there, I get 0. So quick note to self, when you do your conditional rendering, make sure it is indeed a logical expression. That gets us all the time. It's like, what's that thing doing there? Oh yeah, logical expression. Okay, must be logical. So you have to do it the longhand way. Okay, but now we have, there we go. Now you notice it's not calling axis, is it? It's just showing it because nothing is changing. This body here didn't get changed. So it's just rendering the same thing over and over again, but it's kind of cool. Shows my list. Okay, so one more thing before the break, we're going to take this logic, this busy logic, and put it in a custom hook. And we're going to see how hard this is. Let's do that. So we know we need to make a custom hook in a new file, and we're going to have to call it Axios, but we know it has to have the word use in front of it. Let's call it use Axios. Us.js. Axios is like a Roman version of Axios, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Use Axios, okay. And we'll take our logic and put that in our new custom hook. So we'll just take this logic right there. Okay. We'll make a function. We'll call it use Axios there. And we'll take our stuff. Don't need counter. We'll auto import use state. Just like that. There we go. Okay, and we'll auto import use effect like that. And we'll probably can't auto import Axios. We have to actually grab Axios. So let's have to copy that. Okay, great. Now we have a custom hook. Almost done, but our custom hook doesn't return anything. So we probably should return something from our custom hook. And well, return the body. So return Now, in this case, for my purposes now, this is kind of useful. I need to export this. So export default my use Axios. Great. No red lines, no yellow lines. Looks like I'm in business here. So this is now a custom hook. It's just a function. It's going to run and return the body. It's all that's going to happen. And when the underlying component renders the first time, it's going to call useEffect and set that body. That's all that happens here. So now I don't need this logic. I can take this out, and instead I can say my body is now equal to my new custom hook. Let's try that. Keep our fingers crossed. Let's see what happens. Const body equals use. Is it going to notice it? Let's take a look. Oh, wow. Yeah, I love that auto import. Use Axios. Okay. And look at that. No effort at all. For me, money is, I love this. Okay, great. That was it. So I've removed all that messy Axios logic, and I just said, use Axios. And all the work was done inside my custom hook. And I returned the body. So kind of useful. Okay. And let's take a look. Of course, it's still not changing, right? Because we're not rendering anything else. We're simply re-showing the same body. So nothing is changing here. But it works. Okay, let's take a break for 10, and we'll come back. We'll flesh out this custom hook a little more, make it do some more interesting things for us, such as handling errors, of course, because right now, if something goes wrong, it's just going to blow up in our face. So we'll take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back, and we'll carry on. There's our electric timer. All right. Okay, everyone. See everyone back in 9:40. All right. See you soon. Okay. Is everyone back? Let's carry on with the custom hooks. Okay. Well, so right now we have this custom hook called use Axios. It just really just does Axios stuff. Not totally flexible yet because, as you can see, it's got a hard-coded URL. So I think the first thing I'll need to do in this custom hook is probably make that a parameter to my custom hook. So that's easy enough. I'll just say my custom hook takes a URL as a parameter. That's easy enough. And I will, when I call my custom hook, I will give it a URL. Let's give it the same one for now. There, that was easy. Okay, and URL there. Okay, now you notice I'm getting a little bit of a warning. It says, hey, wait a second. You're using this prop URL, it's parameter URL. If that could have changed on you, maybe you might want to include that as a dependency. And yeah, it could change. It's not, but strictly speaking, it could change on me. So React is saying, hey, wait a second, you might want to put that as a dependency. You'll see this once in a while. Note to self, though, in the promise.all in the scheduler, when you get that warning, you shouldn't do that. There's another way we take care of that. That's using the pre version of setState. So, okay, great. So far, looks like it's still working. And I get my favorite quote, my greatest pain in life will be I never will be able to see myself perform live. So love that quote. Okay, there we go. Okay. Everything's still working. Let's add some more functionality to our custom hook. What if something goes wrong? So I probably should track errors as well. So when something happens, I should probably return an error as opposed to the body. So let's track the error. Let's take an error. So error and set error. So now I can return that error to the caller to let them know that something went wrong. Maybe the URL was wrong. Maybe the service is down or something. It's kind of useful. So now I have a then. We do know that the sibling of a then is a catch. And a catch takes error. There. And what it's going to do, it's going to set error to, and let's go error.message, because error.message is really safe. You almost guaranteed it's almost always there. So error.message. Okay, and that's it. So now I've handled the error. When an error happens, just set the error. Well, what am I going to do with this error? It's not exposed. So once again, I have the question. I need to return more than one thing from this custom hook. So I have a choice to make again. Do I use an array or do we use an object? Well, one thing about using an array, let's look at our use counter. It returned an array, counter, increment, decrement, and clear. When I used that use counter, I had to destructure them in order 0, 1, 2, and 3. But what if I just wanted to use the clear and not use those two? Well, I had no choice. It's an array. I had to get the 0th thing, the item at the 0 index of that array, that's my counter, and the item at the 1, 2, 3 index, which means I have to grab them explicitly either in order or go, use counter bracket 0 and bracket 3. So that's one of the downsides of using an array when you turn. Things are in a specific order. So I'm going to use an object instead. I'm going to return, instead of return body, I'm going to return body in an object, which of course is going to break my app for a second, but we can fix that later. Okay. Now I can return the body and I can return the error, just like that. Great. So now in my app, I have to account for that. So now it's no longer body, because now body is an object. I can destructure that body like this, and I still get the body out of it. Great. So far, so good. But now I can get the error as well. And it doesn't matter what order I get them in, because this is an object. So I could have just as well done that as well. Put the error first. No difference. Okay. So because they're named, which means their name is always body. Upside of using an object, order is not important. But a downside is you're stuck with that name. It's called error. You can't change the key. So I love that quote. Yes. Every person's got to have a goal in life. Yes. So, okay. So using an array, they're great because you can change the name of them, right? So the names aren't fixed, but the order is fixed, right? So in this case, I use an array because the order is fixed, but I can change the names. In this case, I'm using an object because the names are fixed, but the order is important, or I don't have to have some of them. I can just go body, right? And it'll work. So if, for instance, I returned things in a different order, like this, look at that, and I just want to use the body, using an object means you can just call body. Even though body is the second thing I'm returning, it's not dependent on order because it's an object, so order is totally irrelevant. I can say body. I don't need to get the error first. Whereas when I use an array, I have to get the things in order. If I wanted to get clear, I would have to get the first 3 things first, or use an array and index directly, which is very cumbersome. So there's advantages both ways. With an array, you can change the name. With an object, you're stuck with that name. It's body. I have no choice. It's called body. I mean, I could do body, one quote, body, but that gets ugly, right? So It's a design choice. You can use either. For use counter, can we use an object? Absolutely, we could. Totally, we could. But then I'm stuck with the name counter. Now, if I'm only using it once, that's great. But if I want to use two counters and call one counter one, can't do that. The name's counter. Like that is the name. You can't call it counter one because counter one does not exist as a key, just as body one does not exist as a key inside that custom hook. It's called body. Why? Because it's body. It's now an object. It's called body. No choice. Okay. Return the error. This is great. Now we're returning two things. So now let's go ahead and use this error. So I can just really just show the error if I want. That'd be easy. Let's try that. Let's go ahead and show my error. So what I can do is inside my LI, there, I can show the quote or the error. Oh, sorry, error. Why did I quote error? Come on. I'll show the error, right? And of course, I'm going to get error from my hook. So now I have both. Okay. So far, so good. What happens if I get an error? Let's go ahead and generate some error. HTTPS X, nasty error. Oh, network error. But it's still showing the current content of body. Oh, okay. Bit of a bug here. Let's go fix that bug. I should probably set body just to empty. There, that'll work. Let's try that. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and fix my broken quote. And do I get a quote? There. Okay, it worked. Oh, but now I get the error. Oh, I get the previous error. Okay, back to my hook. I should probably set the error to something here as well. So I'm going to clear both sides. I'm using both, right? So probably want to set my error. So set, I can set the null. Even better, I'll just set null. Totally doesn't matter, but I'm making it null. There we go. Okay, so now the world is in our office. And if I have something going wrong here, I can network error, or let's go conye.rest, different kind of error. Okay, network error. That's great. Okay, so that's getting more useful. I can do something else. Let's even do this even more fun. Let's do this. How about body and body.quote, an error. This way I'm only showing one. Even if I didn't reset one of them, I'm still showing just the one. And this is useful. Probably a better pattern to do this. Okay, so now network error, yes. Let's go ahead, go. And it works. Okay. Okay, so that's interesting. One more thing, and then we're going to use our hooks in a more interesting way because these are reusable hooks. Right now we're using it once. So let's go ahead and do one more cool thing to our hook. Let's make another state. We're going to call it pending, because sometimes an Axios call or any network call can take some time. Use state, and we'll say pending is, we'll start off with probably with true. So let's say true. Okay, pending. So what we'll do is when we start our Axios call, set pending. And we'll set the true. Even though it's default true, we'll make sure it's true there because our URL might change on us. So we can't rely on this thing being true. And when it's finished, we'll set it to false. I want it false in both places. So I could do this, couldn't I? And say false. That looks a little redundant, doesn't it? Is there a way I could make set pending called false, regardless if it was a then or a catch? Anybody think of a way? If only there was some way in promises that would allow me to do something regardless of then or catch. Anybody remember? Wasn't that long ago. Resolve? Close. Resolve is part of inside promises. It's like, remember, it's like the little brother of then and catch. Who's then's and catch's little brother? Yeah, reject? Not quite. Not quite. Yeah, I forgot the term. What is it? Oh, I can't remember what it is. It's the one that happens like every time. Then catch and something else. Yes. And finally, correct. And finally, that could be an interview question you might ask sometimes. What are the three keywords that we use or functions that we use when using a promise? Then catch and dot finally. A very useful one. Remember I mentioned in the promises lecture for cleanup. When we're done, let's clean ourselves up. Well, in this case, I want to set my pending to false. I'm all done, so we'll do it there. So it takes a function, no parameters, and we'll just set pending to false right there. So now it's always going to happen. Just a little cleaner. So great. And let's return pending. And order is totally unimportant here, so it doesn't matter. There. Returning these three things from my use Axios now. So now I've got a fully functional Axios hook that I can use anywhere. I just give it a URL and it'll give me back my stuff on first render of my component, which is really useful. So I can use my pending. So let's go pending, just like that. And let's show something. If pending, we will, of course, we can't show pending because pending is a Boolean and we know the Booleans don't render. So if I just go pending, it's not going to show anything, nothing. It just, nothing happened, right? So I should probably show something that like display something, probably like the word pending. So, or in progress or fetching data. Sure. Fetching data, ... There we go. Okay. All right. So now it's going to show. Let's take a look. I think anybody see it? It's really fast. I should have made it a set timeout. Anybody see a pending or fetching data in there? Does it render on Zoom? Anyone see yes or no? You saw it? Let's take a look again. It's fast. I mean, Kanye's got a big site. He's got lots of money, so he can afford expensive servers. So, but if it was a slower server, took maybe a second or half a second, you'd see fetching data. Because as you know, when people do stuff, they want to see some feedback. A good user experience is don't let the user wonder what's going on. Like, what's happening? Is this application broken? Is it frozen? Should I hit reset button or unplug my machine? It's been like half a second. Something's got to be wrong. So in today's world, people expect some feedback. So fetching data. So great. Okay. All right. So fending and off. Okay, great. Okay. So a really useful use Axios hook. It has abstracted all of the logic into one line of code. And then you just simply use those things. That's the cool thing about React. You just get the things and you render them. Let something else worry about how those things changed. So right now, get your body and render it. The Axios hook, it will concern itself with how to change these things as needed. You just render them. So we now can focus on the rendering. Let's go ahead and use our Axios hook. We'll make a component. So right now, this is getting kind of messy, isn't it? Like this really is a Kanye component. So let's move this component into its own component file. Let's make a file. We'll call it use, we'll call it a Kanye quote. A Kanye quote.js. Okay. As we know, a React component is a function, Kanye quote. And it's a function that returns from JSX. So we have to return, and we have to return some JSX. So we know it's going to be an LI. So let's make an LI for now. There. Okay. Okay. So there's a React component. I probably should export that. So export default quote, and now I have a component. Doesn't do anything. So what can I put in my Kanye quote? Well, I can really put the Kanye logic. So let's go to our app, and all it does, it calls this use Axios. That much we know. So I'll take this logic right there. I need that. And I can probably auto import use Axios. Okay, it works. That's great. Okay. And I can render my Kanye quote just like this inside my LIs. There. There we go. Notice you get this because what happens is since JavaScript, semicolons are optional. So if you do this, you get an error. But if you do this, it works. Anyone come across this before? Really interesting quirk of JSX. This is fine, but this is not fine. That's because this return statement, since semicolons are optional, it goes, oh, return. Okay, it's done. Oh, unreachable code, because it treated that like that. So to get around that, we have to do this. Okay, we just put braces around it. Now we can use curly braces, round braces. I use round braces like this, there, like that. Whoops. There we go. That works fine. So it's better. So now at least it looks nice. This is why you will see the round braces around the return, because without them, it thinks that return is on its own line and it is just a return. So you have to have that. One of those funny things. Okay. All right. Okay. That looks like it. Like, I don't see anything else to do with this. Like, yeah, I think it's done. Let's give it a try. So now we're going to use a Kanye quote. So instead of this, there, we don't need to call our Kanye hook or our Axios hook anymore. So all of that can go. Let's just put a Kanye component in our app. Let's give it a try. So is it going to find it? Let's take a look. Oh, Kanye quote. I think it worked. Let's just self-close that. And that was it. That was easy. That took us what, like a minute, 2 minutes with a couple typos, but that's it. So now I've got a Kanye quote and it's actually doing /. Ah, here's a fun fact. I don't need that /, by the way. Ah, it still worked. How about this /? Ah, it still worked. Why did that work? That will not work unless you have one slight change to your React app, which, by the way, is built into your scheduler app. If you have this file right there, jsconfig.json, and you have that line in it, then everything is just hook slash. You don't need any // or // or // You just go component / hook /. It'll assume everything is based off of source / stuff. Very useful file to have in every React project. I encourage you to have this file always. It makes your life so easy. The auto import didn't know I had that, so it did, of course, use the // for when it auto imported for me, which did in fact work. Didn't matter, but yeah, it explains the path inconsistency. You're completely right. Yes, we have this file. I would encourage just put the file in project, just copy it. It's just, it never changes. Meaning other stuff, but really, for that thing alone, it is extremely useful. Hook / component / component slash appointments, slash no dot dot no daughter. It's great. Anyway, okay, enough of that. Kanye quote. That was pretty simple. So now it changes every time. Look at this. Why is that? It's because now I'm conditionally rendering. So when I press 0, as I press 1, a brand new component is built. So a new component mounts is the proper term. It is generated, which means this use axis, when it runs, it says, oh, this is the first time now I'm going to run this. URL has changed. So there's a new URL because Kanye quote was built again from scratch, which means it's now running my use axis every single time. So this is cool. So now I'm getting a new quote, which of course we can't get enough of Kanye quotes. So look at this. Awesome. Okay. Okay. We'll leave that one at that. So, well, now we have a custom hook we can use. Let's use our custom hook in other ways. Okay, because Kanye is great. We can't get enough of him, but there's other people that say cool things in the world too. Okay, so let's try another quote. Let's go ahead and build a quote. Go. New file. I'm going to make one called office quote .js. Okay, so let's really take a copy of our Kanye quote because it really is almost the same. And we'll just call it office quote. Great. Now we have an office quote. And I happen to know that there is a URL, which I copied from before. You can put this in instead. And watch how much I'm changing. I'm not going to change a lot. Let's go ahead. There. Okay. I'm going to change the URL. Okay. And I'm going to change the data that you get back because body.quote, that's specific to Kanye. The great thing about the Kanye thing is now this component only has to worry about rendering and what it gets back. It knows it is a Kanye quote. It knows it gets a dot quote back in the body. It knows that. Well, an office quote doesn't get a dot quote back. It actually gets something slightly different. It gets a body.data.content. And this is unique to this particular API. But since they're both here, they match. That and that match. So it's great. It's totally safe. Okay. And these are going to be the same, right? So that was it. Those are the two changes I made other than changing the name of the function to make it work. Okay. Then my dot. Okay. Let's give it a try. See if this actually works because that seemed way too easy. Just change the URL, change a little bit about the object I'm getting. Let's see if we can actually make this thing work. Okay. Let's do an office quote. Office quote. There we go. Let's take a look. There's, okay. That could be a Kanye quote. It could be an office quote. Who votes as an office quote? Anybody? Apparently, like the most favorite binge show during the pandemic was The Office. So there's a lot of beauty in, yeah, for audio import. Yeah. Let's try another one. Let's clear that. And okay, this does look like an office quote. Let's play guess this character. Who do we think said that? She tried to have my kneecaps shattered for sleeping with her husband. Who said this? Anybody? Take a vote. Come on. There's got to be some Office fans out there. Okay. Oscar. That's an Oscar. Can you go to use Axios quickly? Sure. Use Axios. Right there. There it is. So when you give the URL, when the component renders, or the URL changes in this case, it'll fetch the URL and set the body. That's it. Okay. So another one. Do that. Occasionally, I'll hit someone with my car, so sue me. Who said that? I can't remember that one. No votes on that? Okay, let's try another one. I'm immensely proud of what I did for that turtle. Who could have said that? No votes? Okay, come on. It's fine. Keep going. Ooh, okay. Okay, come on. This one I got to know. If I had a gun with 2 bullets and I was running with Hitler, Bin Laden, and Toby, I would shoot Toby twice. Yes, that's Michael. Sometimes I'll start a lecture and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way. That is definitely Gary. So, okay. So there's an office quote. One more quote. We'll use this one more time. Let's make another quote. Easy one, and then we'll move on to something a little more fun. So make a new file. We'll call it a Ron quote. .js. JS. Okay. A Ron quote will look an awful lot like a Kanye quote again, except it has a different name. It's going to be a Ron Swanson quote. Great. I try to find some less offensive ones, but this one was kind of hard. So, okay. All right. So this will be a Ron quote. It has 2 things different. It has a different URL. So I'll grab that and paste that in there. Let's grab my URL. Has a different URL there and a different way that the data is sent to me. In this case, it's body. It comes back as an array, just body 0, because that's what Ron sends me, just an array. He's like a, to the point. None of this dots and body.character.first name. Just give you an array of this stuff. Get to the point right there. So he just gives me an array, and more than one quote. If I ask more than one, I can go /2. I get 2 quotes. So, okay, that was it. Like trivial change to this component, and I got a whole new functionality out of it. Let's try that. Let's try and show a Ron quote. Quote. There we go. Okay. Look at that. Okay. So another offensive quote from Ron Swanson. Okay. So as we can see, custom hooks really do allow you to take functionality out of your application. In this case, Axios. We had our use Axios logic, which was all the messy details of Axios stuff. So rather than have that in each one of our components, our Kanye quote, our office quote, we simply abstracted that Axios logic away and put it inside a custom hook where we could deal with it in a much more sophisticated way. Since we have all this room to play, this is all we have to worry about. We can add some really cool functionality to it, like handling errors and pending, and then just expose those 3 things to anybody who wants to use it. They give us a URL, and we give them back the results of that URL. And then components that want to use it, just say, use Axios and give me a URL. And they get back those 2 things, and then they can render those 3 things. So it does separate the business logic from the display or from the render. Any questions on custom hooks? They're really quite simple. They're just a function. They're a function that starts with the word use, and they return stuff. That's it. Like this one, there's our use Axios, there's a use counter, but function with the word use, and it returns. Here I returned an array, I returned an object, I could return a number. You can return anything you want. They really aren't that complicated. Okay. So that ends our discussion on custom hooks. Why don't we, I'll stop the recording and we'll carry on. We have a couple minutes left with a couple other points, such as we'll talk about things like the spread operator